Hey, I'm Victor. I'm 28 years old and I work as an doctor at New York General Hospital. Honestly, this job is literally draining the life out of me. Every day, I'm faced with life and death situations that are so stressful that it takes your breath away. It was another crazy night on duty last night. I had just finished dealing with a car accident patient when the emergency room door was pushed open again. The nurse yelled, "Doctor, heart attack?" I immediately rushed over to the patient, a male in his 50s, sweating profusely and covering his chest. "Sir, can you hear me?" I asked as I quickly checked his vitals. The next 20 minutes were a race against death, but luckily we were able to stabilize him in the end. By the time I finally managed to catch my breath, it was 3 in the morning. I sat paralyzed in my chair in the doctor's lounge, feeling like my entire body had been emptied. This is my daily life. Crazy, stressful, and challenging. Yes, I love my job, but sometimes I wish life would slow down and give me a chance to catch my breath. After work, I dragged my tired body out of the hospital. The night in New York was still bustling, and the neon lights on the street stung my eyes. I decided to go to a nearby bar to have a drink and relax my tense nerves. I frequented a small concert hall called the Blue Note, just a few blocks from the hospital. I pushed open the door, and the familiar sound of jazz music relaxed my nerves a little. Mike the waiter nodded at me. "The usual?" I smiled and nodded. "A Coke with extra ice." Sitting at the bar, I looked around. The concert hall was not crowded, mostly office workers coming in from work to relax. I noticed a couple whispering in the corner and couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. To be honest, I've been single for a few years now. This job takes up too much of my time and energy to have time for a relationship. Mike looked at my tired face and asked with concern, "Another hard day?" I nodded with a bitter smile. "Yes, I just saved a heart attack patient." Mike sked, "You doctors are really something." I waved my hand. "Just doing my job." We chatted for a while, and Mike made me laugh by talking about the strange customers he'd recently encountered. Just then, my cell phone suddenly rang. It was a hospital number, and my heart was in my throat. "Hello, Dr. Victor? The emergency room is in an emergency situation. Can you come over for backup right away?" The head nurse's urgent voice came from the other end of the phone. I glanced at the couple in the corner and sighed enviously and helplessly. "Okay, I'll be right there." Hanging up the phone, I smiled apologetically at Mike. "Had an emergency to take care of?" Mike nodded understandingly. "Be careful, bro." I walked quickly out of the bar and hailed a cab. As the car drove into the New York night, I looked out the window at the street seen speeding by and felt a sudden pang of loneliness. This was my life, forever running between work and short breaks. I couldn't help but wonder, is this the life I want? But there was no time to think about it now. The cab pulls up in front of the hospital, and I take a deep breath as I step into that familiar world once again. No matter how wonderful the outside world was, this would always be my battlefield. A week went by and I finally got a rare day off. Honestly, I'd forgotten what a day off felt like. It's been a week of hell mode, with several major surgeries in a row that have left me tired as a dog. But today, I decided to take it easy. In the evening, I went back to the Blue Note, and the moment I pushed open the door, the familiar sound of jazz instantly loosened my nerves. The concert hall was busier than usual today, and it took me a bit of effort to find an empty seat at the bar. Mike saw me and greeted me with a smile. "Yo, rare visitor." I laughed bitterly and shook my head. It's hard to take a day off. If I don't relax, I'm afraid I'm going to break down. Mike gave me a sympathetic look, then his eyes lit up. "By the way, there's a new jazz band today. I hear they're pretty good." I was about to reply when I suddenly heard a laugh from the doorway of the concert hall. I turned my head and barely choked on my own saliva. God, that's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. She wore a dark blue dress that set off her skin as pale as porcelain. Her long brown hair was draped casually over her shoulders, glowing softly in the dim light of the bar. But what attracted me the most were her eyes, those big brown eyes that seemed to suck in one's soul. She walked in with a couple of friends, her laughter crisp and clear, brightening the entire concert hall for a few moments. I found myself unable to look away, my heart beating so fast it felt like it was going to pop out of my chest. "Wow," Mike's voice snapped me back to reality. Looks like our doctor got an eyeful. I cleared my throat a little awkwardly. Yeah, it's pretty. Mike gave me a promising look. Go on, get acquainted. I hesitated for a moment. To be honest, it's been a long time since I've initiated a conversation with a girl. But somehow, today I ghosted up. I walked towards the girl, my heart beating faster and faster. She was laughing and joking with her friends and didn't notice my approach. I took a deep breath and gathered the courage to speak. Hi, can I buy you a drink? She turned her head, those beautiful brown eyes looking up at me. I felt my heart racing. Oh, she smiled, showing a row of white teeth. Sure, why not? I was relieved and nervous at the same time. I'm Victor. What about you? Sophie, she held out her hand. It's nice to meet you, Victor. I took her hand in mine and felt an electric current travel through my fingertips. Sophie's friends started to get up in arms, but she didn't seem to care. We found a quiet corner and sat down, and I ordered her a mojito. So, Victor, Sophie took a light sip of her wine. What do you do? I'm a doctor, I said, working in the emergency room at New York General, so I can't drink, and I come here once in a while to listen to music and relax. Sophie's eyes lit up. Wow, that sounds cool. Must be exciting? I laughed. Excitement is true, but it's more stressful. What about you? What do you do? Sophie smiled mysteriously. I'm a freelance photographer. I love capturing those fleeting moments of beauty in life. We chatted more and more, from work to hobbies to life aspirations. Sophie was very talkative and had a great sense of humor. I found myself completely captivated by her and forgot about the passage of time. Without realizing it, the concert hall was getting less and less crowded. Sophie looked at her watch and was a bit surprised. Gosh, it's already so late. It was then that I realized we had been talking for 3 whole hours. It went by so fast, I said a little regretfully. Why don't I take you home? Sophie smiled and shook her head. No, I'll go back with my friends. But, she paused, we can exchange phone numbers. I got excited and said, that's great. We typed in each other's numbers. Sophie stood up and smiled at me. Nice chatting tonight, Victor. See you some other time? Definitely, I said with a smile. Good night, Sophie. I felt my whole body float as I watched Sophie and her friends leave. I went back to the bar and Mike scowled at me. Looks like we've got a doctor in the works. I couldn't help but laugh. Don't be ridiculous. But I knew that after tonight, something might have to change in my life. I felt my cell phone in my pocket where Sophie's number was stored. I was suddenly excited about the future. Walking out of the bar, the New York night enveloped me. But at the moment, the city looked more beautiful to me than ever. After that night, I found myself thinking about Sophie unconsciously all the time when I wasn't working. On my lunch break, I stared at my phone, debating whether or not to send her a message. I know it's silly, but I just can't help myself. Finally, 3 days after meeting Sophie, I worked up the courage to send a text. Hi, Sophie. Are you free this weekend? Would like to buy you a cup of coffee. After texting, every time my phone vibrated, I thought it was her reply, but it turned out to be either spam or a hospital notice. Just when I was about to give up hope, Sophie replied, Sure, I'd love to. How about Saturday afternoon? I barely jumped for joy and hurriedly replied, Great, I'll see you Saturday. We met at a small cafe in Brooklyn on Saturday afternoon, Sophie looking fresh and natural in a simple white t-shirt and jeans. We chatted about everything from work to hobbies to our dreams. Sophie said she dreamed of having her own photography exhibition one day, and I said I hope to be a great surgeon. As we chatted, I suggested a walk to the nearby Brooklyn Bridge Park, and Sophie readily agreed. We strolled through the park and watched the sun slowly set over the East River, when Sophie suddenly stopped and took out her camera. Wait a minute, she said. This light is so beautiful I have to photograph it. A strange feeling welled up in my heart as I watched her taking serious pictures. At that moment, I thought she was more beautiful than the setting sun. We went on a couple more dates in the weeks that followed. Once we went to the Natural History Museum and Sophie was fascinated by the dinosaur fossils like a little kid. Another time, we went on a picnic in Central Park and ended up getting caught in a sudden downpour, but we both laughed our asses off. Every time I'm with Sophie, I feel like I'm back in my student days, that carefree, full of possibilities feeling. But at the same time, I began to feel a twinge of uneasiness. Sophie was always mysterious, never talked about her family, and seldom mentioned her friends. Whenever I asked, she always skillfully changed the subject. The other night, I invited Sophie over to my apartment for dinner. I spent the whole afternoon preparing and even went online to learn a few new dishes. When Sophie walked in, she looked at the table I had set and the candles I had lit with amazement. "Wow," she said with a smile. "I didn't realize you had it in you." I scratched my head a little embarrassed. "I hope you like Italian food." Dinner went well and Sophie was very impressed with my cooking. After dinner, we sat on the couch and talked. Somehow the conversation turned to our relationship. "Victor," Sophie suddenly became serious. "You're a great guy, really." "But—" My heart suddenly hung in the air. "But what?" Sophie hesitated. "But I'm not sure I'm ready to enter a serious relationship. My life is. It's more complicated." I felt a sinking feeling in my heart, but steeled myself. "It's okay. We can take it slow. I don't want to pressure you." Sophie looked at me with a flash of emotion in her eyes that I couldn't read. Then, she suddenly came over and kissed me. That kiss came suddenly, yet so naturally. I felt my brain instantly short-circuit and my entire body's blood boil. When we broke apart, Sophie's eyes sparkled in a way I'd never seen before. "Maybe we could try," she said softly. I couldn't contain myself any longer and pulled her into my arms and kissed her deeply. Sophie stayed that night. When I woke up the next morning and looked at her sleeping face, I felt like the happiest person in the world. But at the same time, that little uneasiness in the back of my mind was growing. What's Sophie's secret? What does she mean by complicated? I don't know. But right now, I just want to cherish the happiness that's right in front of me. I kissed Sophie gently on the forehead and got up to make us breakfast. Outside the window, the New York sun was shining brightly on the city that never sleeps. I took a deep breath and felt like life had never been better. Spending time with Sophie was a dream. We would wander the alleys of Brooklyn together, feed the pigeons in Central Park, or simply stay in my apartment watching old movies all day. Every moment made me feel like, this is the life I want. But you know what? Life is like that. When you think everything is perfect, there are always little things that pop up to upset the balance. I was on night shift that day, and I didn't get off work until after 3 a.m. I dragged my tired body home and thought of Sophie. I dragged my tired body back home, and all I could think of was Sophie. We hadn't seen each other for 3 days, and I especially wanted to send her a message. I wanted to send her a message, but on second thought, it was so late. She must be sleeping. I shouldn't disturb her. I slumped down on the couch and casually turned on my cell phone to see if there was any news. Just then, I saw a missed call from Sophie, dated an hour ago. I froze. Sophie called me at 2 in the morning? Why? I immediately called back, but the call went straight to voicemail. I tried several more times with the same result. An uneasy feeling began to spread through me. All day the next day, I was distracted. I sent several messages to Sophie, but she didn't reply to any of them. This wasn't like her. Sophie was mysterious at times, but never completely disappeared like this. By the end of the night, I couldn't help myself and decided to visit Sophie's house. But it was then that I realized a fact that surprised myself. I had no idea where Sophie's house was. For as long as we've been dating, every date has been either out or at my house. Sophie has never invited me to her house, and surprisingly, I've never asked. The realization sent a wave of vertigo through me. I pulled out my cell phone and went through our chats, hoping to find some clues. Just then I saw a message Sophie had sent a couple days ago. "I'm going to a friend's birthday party at the Grand Bar on Friday night. Do you want to come along?" I politely declined at the time because I was on duty. But now, this message became my only lead. I looked at my watch, and it was almost 10 o'clock. I hesitated, but decided to take my chances. Maybe Sophie had gone to that bar again? Half an hour later, I was standing in front of the Grand. It was an upscale bar I'd never been to before, and there were 2 burly security guards standing in front of it. I took a deep breath and walked in. The bar was dimly lit, and the music was deafening. I trudged through the crowd, my eyes constantly searching for Sophie. Just when I was about to give up, I saw her. Sophie was sitting at the bar, joking with a man. The man was probably in his late 30s, in a suit, and looked to be a successful man. They seemed to know each other well, and Sophie lets out a silvery laugh from time to time. I stood there feeling like a fool. Sophie didn't look like she was in a hurry at all. On the contrary, she looked happy. Just then the man leaned over and whispered something in Sophie's ear. Sophie smiled and nodded before they stood up together and headed for the back door of the bar. I don't know what came over me, but ghostly, I followed. I watched as they walked out the back door and got into a limo parked in the alley. The car started slowly and disappeared into the New York night. I stood still, feeling like the whole world was spinning. Who the hell was Sophie? What was her relationship with that man? Why was she hiding this from me? I pulled out my cell phone, wanting to call Sophie and ask for clarification. But with my finger hanging over the top of the screen, I was hesitant to press it. I'm afraid to hear the answer. That night, I had a sleepless night. Lying on my bed, I thought back to the moments I had spent with Sophie. Those sweet memories now seemed to carry a hint of bitterness. Sophie, how many secrets do you have that I don't know about? I tossed and turned until dawn. Outside the window, the sun was still shining in New York, but my heart was shrouded in gloom. I know, I need the truth. That morning, I called the hospital and made up an excuse to take a vacation. I knew it was unprofessional, but I just couldn't concentrate on my work, and it was responsible for my patients. My mind was full of Sophie and the mystery man. I sat at the dining room table in my apartment, staring at my phone. Sophie still hadn't returned my messages. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether to move forward or backward. Just then, my cell phone rang. My heart skipped a beat, thinking it was Sophie, but it turned out to be my old friend Amelia. "Hey Victor, how are you?" Amelia's voice came through the receiver. "I just called the hospital and they said you took a leave of absence. That's not your style. What happened?" I sighed. Amelia was my classmate in medical school and now works at the same hospital. She knew me well enough to know that I wouldn't take a vacation for no reason. "Amelia," I hesitated, but decided to speak up. "I'm in a bit of trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Amelia's voice was immediately serious. I told her everything that had happened recently, including Sophie's mysterious behavior and a scene I'd seen at the bar. There was silence on the other end of the phone for a moment. Then Amelia said, "Victor, have you ever thought? Maybe Sophie isn't who you think she is." I felt a stabbing pain in my heart. "I know," I said bitterly, "but I want to know the truth." Amelia was silent for a moment, then said, "I have a cousin who is a private investigator. If you really want to know the truth, maybe he can help." I froze. Hire a private investigator? It sounded like the plot of some cheesy TV show, but at the moment, it seemed like my only option. "Well," I finally said, "give me his contact information." Hanging up the phone, I sat there, staring at the number Amelia had sent me. Was I really going to do this? Was this too much? But Sophie's smiling face and the image of the strange man came back to me. I gritted my teeth and dialed the number. The private investigator's name is Mike, and he sounds like a very professional guy. He asked me some basic information about Sophie and then said he needed a few days to investigate. "I'll get back to you as soon as I can," Mike said. "But Victor, you have to be prepared. Sometimes the truth may not be what we want." I smiled bitterly. I know, but not knowing the truth would drive me crazy. The next few days were torture. I forced myself to go to work, but Sophie was always on my mind outside of work, and every time my cell phone rang, I nervously assumed it was a message from Mike. Sophie still hasn't contacted me. I sent her a few messages, but they all went stone cold. I began to wonder, maybe she had decided to leave me? The thought made my heart ache. Finally, on the fourth night, Mike called. "Victor, I found out some information." His voice was serious. "You'd better come and see for yourself." I immediately drove to Mike's office. My hands shook when I saw the folder on his desk. "Victor," Mike said, "I want to make sure before you open it. Are you really ready?" I took a deep breath and nodded. I have to know the truth. I opened the folder, and inside were some photos and documents. When I saw the first photo, I felt my heart stop. That's Sophie in the picture, but she's not alone. She's holding the arm of the man I saw at the bar the other night, and the two of them are standing in front of a luxury villa. They look close, like a couple. I shuddered and turned to the next page. A marriage certificate? It clearly read Elizabeth Parker and James Parker, and Elizabeth Parker's original name was Sophie Wilson. I felt like my world was falling apart. Sophie? No, Elizabeth was married. And I, just an episode in her life. I'm sorry, Victor. Mike's voice seemed to come from a great distance. But you want the truth, don't you? I nodded woodenly, feeling like an empty shell. Walking out of Mike's office, the New York night enveloped me. I walked aimlessly down the street, my mind blank. What am I gonna do? What am I going to do about Sophie? No, Elizabeth? What am I going to do with myself? I pulled out my cell phone and hesitated for a long time before finally dialing Amelia's number. Amelia, my voice was hoarse. I need your help. I knew that what I was going to face next would be the toughest moment of my life. But I had no choice. I had to face this harsh truth. Amelia's voice still echoed in my ears. Victor, are you sure you want to do this? I looked at the text message on my cell phone screen. To send or not to send? My finger hangs over the top of the screen, hesitating. Finally, I took a deep breath and hit the send button. Sophie, I want to talk to you. Tonight at 8 o'clock at my house. It's important and I know where you live. After texting, I felt like I had jumped off a cliff. There was no turning back, and this time I knew Sophia would come back for me. Amelia sat on my couch and looked at me worriedly. Are you sure you don't need me to be there? I shook my head. No, this is between me and her. But can you wait around? I might need you at any moment. Amelia nodded. Sure. I'll be downstairs in the cafe waiting for you. Come up anytime you need me. Time passed by, and my heart beat faster and faster. As I expected, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and Sophie was standing there, beautiful as ever, but with a hint of unease in her eyes. Victor, what's wrong? Did something happen? I stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. Come in. We need to talk. Sophie walked in and looked around the room as if looking for something out of the ordinary. I gestured for her to sit down, then took a deep breath and spoke, Sophie, or should I call you Elizabeth? Her face turned pale instantly. Victor, what are you talking about? I opened the folder on the coffee table and pulled out the picture of her and James. What's going on, Sophie? Or rather, Elizabeth Parker. Sophie. No. Elizabeth looked at the picture, a flash of panic in her eyes, but quickly regained her composure. She looked up at me with mixed emotions in her eyes. Victor, I can explain. Just then, the doorbell rang again. Elizabeth and I froze. I hadn't told anyone that anyone was coming over tonight. I walked to the door and was surprised to find another man in a suit next to Amelia. I recognized him as James, the man who had been with Elizabeth at the bar that night. I'm sorry, Victor. I didn't stop. Amelia said quickly. He said he was here to see his wife. I didn't know what was going on. Before I could respond, James pushed past me and walked in. His eyes locked directly on Elizabeth. Elizabeth, that's enough. His voice was low and tired. It's time for the game to end. Elizabeth stood up, tears in her eyes. James, I feel like I've been caught up in a dystopian movie. Wait, I interrupted them. What the hell is going on? Someone explain? James turned to me with a mixture of anger and sympathy in his eyes. Victor, I'm so sorry you've been caught up in this farce. Elizabeth is my wife and we've been married for 4 years. But lately, she seems to think that our life is too dull. So she started this game. I feel like my heart is being torn to pieces. A game? My voice was hoarse. Is that your definition of our relationship, Elizabeth? A game? Elizabeth finally broke down and burst into tears. No, Victor, it's not like that. I'm really in love with you, but I didn't know how to end it. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I ended up hurting everyone. The room fell into silence. I felt like my mind went blank, unable to process the information. Finally, it was James who broke the silence. Elizabeth, we should go. We have a lot to talk about. Elizabeth nodded and wiped away her tears. She looks over at me with apologies and dismay in her eyes. Victor, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I hope one day you can forgive me. I didn't respond, just watched woodenly as they left. The sound of the door closing was like thunder in my ears. Amelia came over and hugged me gently. Victor, I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry. I felt my tears finally come to my eyes. All the anger, sadness, disappointment, and confusion came pouring out. I cried out in pain in Amelia's arms, like a wounded child. At that moment, I felt like my world had completely collapsed. The true love I once thought I had found turned out to be nothing more than an elaborate scam. I don't know how I'm going to recover from this blow, but I do know that from this day forward, my life will never be the same again. Outside the window, the night in New York remains the same. The city that never sleeps continues its hustle and bustle as if nothing has happened. But for me, it's all over. For the next few days, I was like a walking zombie. I called in sick for a week, locked myself in my apartment, didn't answer my phone, didn't respond to messages. Amelia would come knocking on my door every day, bringing me food, but I always told her I was fine and for her not to worry. It wasn't until the fifth day that Amelia couldn't hold back any longer. She opened my door with a spare key and saw me lying on the couch in a pudgy mess, surrounded by takeout boxes and beer cans. "That's enough, Victor," she huffed. "You can't go on like this." I looked up at her and buried my face in the pillow again. "Whatever, it's all over anyway." Amelia came over to me and yanked me to my feet by grabbing me by the collar. "Listen, you self-hating asshole. Yes, you've been cheated on and you're hurt. But it's not the end of the world. You still have a job, you still have friends, and so many patients who need your help. You can't just give up on everything." I froze. Amelia's words were like a cold shower of water on my head, sobering me up. "You're right," I murmured. I shouldn't have." Amelia's expression softened. "Listen, Victor, I know you're in a lot of pain right now, but you're not alone. We're all here, ready to support you." And she hesitated. "James reached out to me." "James?" I said in surprise. "Elizabeth's husband? What does he want with you?" Amelia sighed. "He wants to talk to you. He says he owes you an explanation." I was silent. I wasn't sure I was ready to face James. But on the other hand, maybe this was my only chance for relief. "Well," I said at last, "tell him I'm willing to meet." The next day, James and I met in Central Park. The moment I saw him, I felt my stomach turn. But to my surprise, James looked haggard as well. "Victor," he held out his hand. "Thank you for wanting to see me." I hesitated, but shook his hand. As we walked slowly along the path in the park, James began to tell the story of him and Elizabeth. They fell in love when they were young and got married, but as time went on, the passion wore off and Elizabeth began to feel that life was too dull and James was too busy working to notice the changes in his wife. "I'm not excusing her," James said. "Her behavior was wrong and hurt everyone. But I'm also responsible. I ignored her feelings and didn't recognize the problem in time." I listened with mixed feelings. "So, you guys are now," I wanted to say. James laughed bitterly. "We're trying to repair the relationship. It's a little complicated, but we both realized what the problem was, and it's a start." I nodded, not knowing what to say. "Victor," James stops abruptly and turns to me. "I know this may be hard, but I want you to forgive Elizabeth. Not for her, but for yourself. Don't let this affect your belief in love." I looked into James' eyes and saw sincerity and apology. I took a deep breath and felt a knot in my heart slowly loosen. "I'll give it a try," I said. "Thanks, James." When we parted, James gave me a hug. The hug gave me a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. Later that night, I called Amelia and asked her if she wanted to come out for a drink. We went to the Blue Note, which is where I first met Sophie. No, Elizabeth. Mike saw us and gave a surprised look. "Wow, Doc, long time no see." I smiled. "Yeah, lately, something's come up." We sat down and Mike brought me a Coke as usual, but I signaled him to switch to wine because I wanted to relax for once before getting back to work and life. I raised my glass and said to Amelia, "Thank you, Amelia, for always being there for me." Amelia laughed. "What's the thanks for that? Aren't we friends?" Just then, the jazz band in the concert hall began to play. The familiar melody brought back memories, but strangely enough, I didn't feel pain. On the contrary, I felt a kind of peace. Amelia and I chatted, laughed, and joked. Without realizing it, we had a little too much to drink. Hey, Amelia snapped, let's go walk around Times Square. I looked at my watch, and it was almost 2 in the morning. That late? Amelia made a face. Come on, it's New York, the city that never sleeps. Come on, let's get crazy. I was infected by her enthusiasm and nodded, okay, let's go. We stumbled down the sidewalk in Times Square, still buzzing around us, and Amelia suddenly started dancing, pulling me around by the hand. We were laughing like two maniacs, drawing curious stares from passers-by. Just then, a cop walked over. Hey, you two, calm down. Amelia poked her tongue out. Sorry, officer. We're just celebrating life. The cop raised an eyebrow. Celebrating life? At 2 in the morning? I suddenly laughed. Yeah, officer. Because life, no matter how hard it is always worth celebrating. The cop looked at us and finally shook his head with a helpless smile. Well, be safe. Stay out of trouble. As we watched the police walk away, Amelia and I looked at each other and suddenly burst into a fit of laughter. At that moment, I felt like I was living again. Yes, I had been through a relationship scam, but that wasn't all my life had to offer. I still have a job, friends, and this city that never stops. I looked up at the huge LED screen in Times Square, its colorful glow illuminating the night sky. I took a deep breath and felt the pulse of New York. Life goes on, and I, too, will move on. A few months have passed. Autumn in New York crept in, and the leaves in Central Park began to turn yellow. I stood on the path in the park, took a deep breath of air with the scent of fall, and felt a whole lot more relaxed. Since that crazy night, my life has slowly gotten back on track. I've gotten back into the swing of things, and Amelia says I'm literally a different person, more patient with my patients and smiling more. Speaking of Amelia, there was a subtle change in our relationship. After that night, we started going out to dinner and movies together more often. Sometimes, I would sneak a look at her side face and a ripple would spread through my heart. But I wasn't ready to start a new relationship, and Amelia seemed to understand that, and we just kept a comfortable distance. It was a sunny Sunday, and I asked James to meet me at the park. Yes, you heard right. It's Elizabeth's husband, James. It's amazing how we've become friends these past few months. I saw James walking toward me from a distance, holding a golden retriever. Hey, Victor, waved James at me. Look who's here. I crouched down and scratched Golden's chin. This is Max, James said with a smile, is newly adopted by Elizabeth and me. We thought, the family needed some new changes. I stood up and looked James in the eye. He looked much happier than he had a few months ago, and there was a gleam in his eyes. So, you and Elizabeth? I asked cautiously. James nodded. It's not easy, but we're working on it. We've started seeing marriage counseling, and it's working out pretty well. I felt a wave of relief. As much as Elizabeth had hurt me, I didn't want to see a marriage fall apart like that. That's great, I said sincerely. I'm happy for you guys. James patted me on the shoulder. Thank you, Victor. Seriously, if it wasn't for you, I might never have realized we had a problem. You gave us a chance to start over. I was a little surprised, but then smiled. I guess everyone deserves a second chance, don't they? We walked slowly along the park's trails, chatting about what was going on with each other. James saying that he was starting to cut back on his hours to spend more time with Elizabeth, and me telling him that I had recently been promoted to attending physician in the emergency room. As he walked to the exit of the park, James suddenly stopped. Hey, Victor, we're having a small party next Saturday to celebrate Elizabeth and I's wedding anniversary. Would you like to come? I froze. Going to Elizabeth's house? To their party? The invitation came so suddenly that I didn't know how to respond for a moment. James seemed to see my hesitation and hastily said, Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. No, I interrupted. I'll be there. I surprised myself a little when I said that. But then, I felt an inexplicable relief. I realized that I had finally truly let go. James broke into a big smile. Great. Elizabeth will be so happy to know. We said our goodbyes, and instead of going home right away, I walked around the park a little more. I pulled out my cell phone and sent Amelia a message. Hey, are you free next Saturday? Accompany me to a party? Amelia quickly replied, sure. What kind of party is it? I smiled and replied, anew friends. I'll tell you the details then. Putting down my cell phone, I looked up at the blue sky. Suddenly, I felt like the whole world had brightened up. Yes, life has punched me in the face, but it also taught me forgiveness, growth, and the courage to start over. What happened to Elizabeth is no longer a scar on my heart, but a lesson that made me grow. I take a deep breath and feel the energy of New York. This city, like me, never stops moving. I think of that crazy night in Times Square, Amelia's smile, James' sincerity, and Elizabeth. Even though that relationship was a lie, those beautiful moments were real. I don't regret going through it all, because it is these experiences that have shaped me into the person I am now. I pulled out my cell phone and called the hospital. Hi, Sarah, I said to the head nurse. I was wondering, could we organize a volunteer program in the ER? You know, to help patients who are lonely. Walking out of the park, I felt energized. Life was long and I, Victor, was ready for the next challenge. After all, every day is a new beginning in this city that never sleeps. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.